What's up? So today you're in Jake's shop and I thought I'd do a little Camaro update on panel prep. I like to use original sheet metal as much as possible. There is a lot more work in it most times. These are fenders, for example, that I bought on Craigslist behind me. And the metal's really good metal. There's no major rust in them. There's a couple corners and some things. I'll show you the processes I'm using today to remove the paint and prep these panels. And at least start the first part of the process.
Okay, so like I said, this is OER or original sheet metal from 1968 Camaro. Now, these fenders were Craigslist fenders, and my door was a Craigslist door. Was not part of the car when I bought it, but everything is error correct. So you see here about 8 hours of stripping paint. These fenders that I bought off Craigslist, after sanding off the light coating of primer on them, I found 3 additional coats of paint underneath. So, you know, it's all about money and time when you're doing something like this, and at the end of the day, stripping works pretty well for me. I have ventilation fans, I've got the doors open when I'm stripping these, and it was about, and I did it in multiple coats, you know. Using a good aircraft stripper or just paint stripper, I went to the local hardware store and they had some clean strip. It says 15 minutes, and yeah, not really. I brushed that stuff on very, very thick. You let it bubble up, scrape it, scrape it off. Wear gloves, wear respirators. That stuff is nasty. Scrape it off and then do it again and again and again until you get to a point to where most of it's off. And then after that, time to start sanding, at least for me. I used a few different things for sanding these down. I'll go into the tools that I used here in a second, but I do want to talk a little more about the OE sheet metal here. You know, the aftermarket sheet metal you buy a lot of times won't have a lot of imperfection in it like these do. You know, obviously, I've got little dents where I've dug out some primer, and, you know, I've got an issue on the nose that I have to deal with down here. I actually sprayed some primer in there, or just some flat black rattle can paint to kind of get an idea what I'm dealing with. That whole area had mud in it. It's not horrible, but part of my body line is kind of gone in here, and then I've got some low spots in here. So there's definitely going to be a lot of work on these after the fact. I haven't touched the insides of them. They won't go to bare metal. I'll be sanding them down, of course, and getting everything that's loose in there up, and then epoxy priming the inside of them as well once I'm done, but really just focus on the outsides right now. So yeah, you know, it's good metal, and it's actually kind of nice. If you are going to buy stuff on Craigslist or old fenders or doors or whatever for your car, believe it or not, even though the paint is a bear to take off, it usually means you're not going to have rust underneath if the more coats of paint. You know, unless it's bubbling up and you can actually physically see it. But if you can't and you don't, and it's got a few coats of paint, you know, usually that means it's well sealed and there's no rust. And what I mean by rust isn't like rust that is holes in this stuff, but rust, what I'm talking about, is right here. Now, I'm hoping, I got the light on, that you're going to be able to see this in the camera, but there's little teeny pinhole. That's not rust, but these are, and that is, and it's solid as a rock. But this door only had primer on the face of it. It's solid door. I mean, there's nothing not solid about this door. It is a solid door. It's pretty good condition. It had obviously an issue here, which I started to heat shrink. I haven't finished yet, but I'll go into that later. This door is still very usable in my opinion. You know, this isn't a $200,000 car when I get done, but the paint job I put on this car should last 30 plus years, no problem, if I do it right. And the way to do this right is obviously take it down to bare metal. Anytime you're going to repaint a car that's this old, I would take it down to bare metal. It's a lot of extra work, and that's why you see 3-4 coats of paint on these cars. It's easy to hide the imperfections in these cars when people just keep stacking mud on top of mud and blending it down, and you're not going to see the problem for years until you realize it's a problem. So I don't know why. People don't know how to use a hammer and dolly, apparently. People don't know how to heat shrink. They're pretty easy processes to play with, and they go a long way. I will probably go ahead and do separate videos on just that, given that I'm probably going to be working on this car for the next 2 months doing body work here in the shop before I even think about spraying paint. But I'll probably do separate videos on that, but I want to talk about these rust points because this is kind of part of the panel prep stage. Before you even think about mud or primer or anything, you know, you don't want to leave them in bare metal for too long, and as long as you got a really nice dry space, it's doesn't have a bunch of humidity in it, you should be pretty good to go. But you know, strip them down to bare metal. That's the very first thing. Get them down to bare metal, see what you're working with. I mean, at some point you might get a part and realize it's just not worth fixing. But all of these appear to be. The other fender on the back side's close. But I am going to go ahead and do it just because I really like the idea of these. These are matching fenders off of a car, just not this one, and they're just error correct. But taking it down, so after the stripper, here is my menagerie of everything I like to use. Now, right after the stripper goes off, I use my DA sander. This is just a DeWalt regular variable speed sander. I'm using 60 grit sanding disc. It's a hook and loop sanding disc, and I'm using 80 grit as well, and I'm just switching back and forth. The 80 kind of seems to last longer for me on the bare metal, but it doesn't take it off as quick, so I use that after I've gotten kind of the bigger stuff down with that. And I kind of clean up the panels. Now, after the panels are clean-ish, there's still areas where there's chunks of paint that the stripper didn't get, unless you want to do like 10 coats of stripper and keep touching up all those little areas, which I didn't want to do because it's nasty and it's fumes and I wanted to get the shop closed up. I went ahead and used a flapper disc on my angle grinder here, and actually what I did, you got to be careful with these because you need to not be taking off metal, but anywhere there was deep mud, I was using this and I was able to variable the speed slightly and keep it nice and slow and get the mud out to a point to where I could hit it with the sander and then take the light layer of mud off quick rather than having to dig it out completely with that. They also make some pretty cool tools that I've used as well, and this is a paint stripper on a 1/4 inch die grinder, and again this spins pretty fast. It takes off material pretty quickly. There's not really a downside to it other than you're not taking very much off at a time, and it is harder to dig into the metal and hurt the metal with this. Again, when you're working out paint or anything, you want to keep it moving. Don't be sitting there in one spot. The idea being that you don't want to heat the metal up and warp it. That's why you're using sanders and different things, and you're not just hitting this thing with a flapper disc on a grinder and ripping it off instantly or some other huge evasive device. There's also this I tried, my buddy had. This is a paint stripper. It's a pretty neat little machine actually, and it worked pretty good. Again, this drum doesn't take off material as good as this does, but it's wider. So again, the thicker stuff, this helped as well, taking this down in some areas on the bigger flat areas to kind of run this over it a few times. That got a lot of the bigger chunks that were left from the stripper off. So then I can go back to my DAs. I also have an air DA, and then again this is a 120 grit, and I went with the 120 when I got to this level. Now this level is basically what you're seeing here is the original sealer on the car. This area had some mud or some acid etch going on in it from underneath because this dent here, it was kind of, you know, there was mud like all in here. Really light layer, but my guess is whoever made that dent repair just cleaned this off all the way and got down past the layer of sealer that was originally on the car. But, you know, stripped metal that's clean with no rust looks like that. I mean, there's no little spots, there's no little shadows. You know, the little bit of shadow that's kind of showing up in the camera there is actually still a little bit of that original sealer that was underneath there. I actually am going to check, you know, I am by no means a painter, I am by no means a body guy, but I'm dangerous enough to know some stuff, and I kind of like doing it. And I'm kind of challenging myself on this build to take it to another level by just really going to town on it. But so I'm going to talk to my buddy about this. I actually think that this light layer sealer is probably going to be okay on here for the most part. I've got most of it off. The epoxy primers today just etch right in through everything, and as long as the panel's clean before priming, it should attach right into it, but I'll verify that because you spend a lot of time just taking all this sealer off, and it's not that, I mean, it's completely flat. It's very, very thin. If anything, it's protecting the metal. So my only concern would be that the epoxy primer I shoot over that definitely adheres to it, which I think it will, but if it won't, I'll be taking the rest off. I'll be checking with him on that. So yeah, here we go on this little bit of rust. So let's say you got all your panels completely clean. You're all your tools there and you've gone through everything. The next step to fix that is what you see here. This black sheen is actually called rust mort. Now, the stuff I've used in some of my other videos is a very similar product in an aerosol version, but it's not an industrial grade version. The correct stuff to use if you're doing the paint job properly is to use more commercial grade product. This is SEM, this is rust mort. Now, this stuff is nasty too. You need to be wearing gloves and whatnot when you're using it. But it's pretty simple. All you do is put that in a squirt bottle, or you can brush it, and you brush the panel. I'm going to rust mort this probably again. I left one area unrust morted so I can kind of show you. But you spray it on and you leave it overnight. Come back the next day and then you neutralize it with water. Now that doesn't mean hose it down. It's bare metal, right? You're just going to want to wipe it down with a damp rag. After that, go through, I would recommend, again, bare metal water. I don't like that plant at all, so I will wipe it down with a bare rag just to kind of neutralize anything that could potentially still be in there. And then I'm sanding it. I'm going to sand it off. And after I sand all this down back to bare metal, if I still see evidence of rust, I'll do it again. That just ensures that there's no rust in there. You know, the epoxy primers today can hide that for a long, long time, and it may never even show up in your lifetime, but knowing that it's completely solid is just a lot of insurance. Your metal's your base. Your base is the most important part. Paint you can fix. Paint you can buff out. Paint you can work with. But if the paint won't attach or the primer doesn't attach to the metal for a long duration and it bubbles, you just shot the whole thing apart. So that's why it's so important to just watch for rust on these things. I actually had some other spots on here that I was going to show where it was rusting, but a lot of it's been rust mortared. Until I sand it, I'm not going to see it again. Or maybe you might not see it at all, or it'll be black. As long as it's black, it means it's neutralized. So that's a lot of the panel prep that goes into these things. I will probably have over, I don't know, 40 hours into these before I'm done. And a lot of that's just going to be because, you think you're in bare metal now and you're ready to go even after you've rust mortared and you killed your rust. The next thing to do is do this right and start looking for dents that are easy to access for hammer and dolly. You can start to try to heat areas and cool them down, and you get that heat shrinkage. And what that's doing is the metal's warming up, it's flexing, and then you heat it down, it shrinks. Metal has a memory. Even when it's got a crease in it like this, it'll have somewhat of a memory. It'll come back. It's not going to come back perfect, and unless you had a hammer and dolly and you wanted to work on these for weeks on end, you could probably get them to where you might not even need to have any mud in it. But my goal is not to not have any mud. Mud's okay. A little bit of mud's okay if it's used properly, but or filler. But I don't want a lot. There were areas even on these panels, you can't even see it, but this whole area was low. There was about a ½ inch of mud here. And I've actually started to hammer this one out earlier because I was playing with it, but it's already coming back. I mean, again, there's still going to be mud in here, but it's going to be very, very thin when I get done. Again, just using the hammer and dolly stuff. So I will go into probably another video at this point. I just wanted to kind of show some of the processes and tools I was using to prep these panels and really get an idea of what's involved in that. And then I'll probably do a separate video. I'll get some of this cleaned off, finish the rust mort process on this panel, and there is one on the other fender and area I want to do. I probably won't bother with the whole panel because, again, these were coated in paint, and it's going to be quite a while before they're going to be primed. I mean, I need them primered here soon, but that is a great dent right there to put a hammer and dolly on. It's easy access underneath, and right now that thing is probably a ½ inch deep, but in this side's almost flat. Again, I'll check that by squirting a little bit of paint over it and blocking it with a flat block, and then I'll see there's my, this is my low spot, and it'll feather back slightly. So I'll hammer and dolly it up, being careful not to go too high. You would rather have it too low than too high, because if it's too high, you're going to have to beat it back down. But not that low, Again, trying to keep as minimal mud out of it as possible. I just don't like the idea of driving around with it. A lot of today's fillers are pretty awesome. They stick well, especially when you prep the panels properly. for doing that. And again, I'll go into separate videos about that as well, but I was just really impressed to see how much paint was on this thing. You know, when I took the first layer of primer off of these and saw paint underneath, I'm like, okay, good. That's probably better. That means there's no surface rust. But I found ghost flames on top of them, which was kind of fun to see, and then about 2 additional coats of paint under that. So yeah, I'll probably wrap this one up, and we'll switch to a separate video here. And on my next one, I'll show some hammer and dolly and some of these dents and how I like to do it, and we'll go from there. Thanks. Okay, so I went ahead and set up the fender. I'm going to go ahead and show a little clip on the hammer and dolly on this. So basically all I've done is I've got that dent in the top of the fender that I was talking about earlier, and this is a great one to try and get better. That way there's less filler, or maybe even no filler if I can get it close enough. Like I said before, there was probably almost maybe not a 1/4 inch worth there, but there was a deep little spot. You know, maybe a tree branch hit this car back 20 years ago, and they were too lazy to take the fender off the car and the inner fender well out and all that, so they just patched it. So anyways, I went ahead and shot a light coating of paint over it. You know, and I'm just using Krylon. Something cheap, something easy to get your hands on, light coat on there. It'll flash off pretty quick if it's light coat, and then you can block on it, which is really going to show me where the dent's at. So what I've got here is a sanding block, nothing special. I'm using 120, you could use 80, you could use anything. And all I'm going to do is try and really locate that dent. So this should, if I do it right, really bring out where that low spot is in this area. Yeah, see, you're starting to see it now. So now we can see here that this thing is going right in here, and it's interesting because this side of the fender is almost perfect. There's a little bit there where when that pushed in, it pulled this in, but really I'm going to focus on this one. You know, there's going to be a lot of dents in these pieces when you get them, and a lot of them you're not even going to see, and you'll actually feel. You know, most guys that do this for a living use their hands, not their eyes. Which makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're feeling the lines of the car. You know, you're really trying to feel that. So there's that dent. Hammer and dolly. You know, there's a bunch of different hammer and dollies. This is a kit I've had for a little while. The hammers are they're nice and flat and round. They make a couple different sizes. Backside if you're trying to work on a crease. And this is just a dolly. You know, it's a little round dolly. They make a bunch of different types of dollies. I actually have a few more in the box, which I'll probably bring over. And I'm going to go ahead and time-lapse this, and I'm going to time-lapse me basically holding the dolly on this side and just pounding on the back side where I can get to it now really easily, and just watch it come out. You know, you're not beating on it like crazy, a little bit, but it's repetition. It's a you know, you're trying to work that dent out as the metal. You know, you're basically putting energy into it, right? Energy, molecules, they start moving. The more energy you put into that, the faster it moves. I could probably even heat shrink it a little bit if I wanted, but I'm going to try and get the hammer and dolly on there first and see how much better we can make that. So I'll go ahead and turn around and I'll do a little time lapse of that, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so yeah, that wasn't too bad. That probably took about five minutes or so. Time lapse makes it go quick, obviously, and I know it probably doesn't look great, but hopefully you can kind of see it through the time lapse. What happened there is it comes up, it's coming up, it's coming up. I mean, I can obviously feel it, but that is like primer. You know, that's really just going to take primer. You can see, I don't know if you're going to see it in the camera, but my sanding, the grit is starting to come through here just a little bit. I mean, there's like no dent there anymore. I mean, there's a low spot, but we're talking like, you know, 10 mils maybe. I mean, it's not going to be much. I could probably work on it a little bit more if I wanted, but at the end of the day, I definitely don't want to risk bringing these up, and since I'm not a body guy, you know, I'm probably not the one that would make perfection out of that without spending 30 minutes on it. And you know, I'm already going a pretty nice level by not really needing mud in places like that. I might put a little in there and to see what happens, have them block it out before I prime on ones like that, just to see. You know, it'll be super light. And you can see here on the top side, there's obviously a little dent there. Again, the sanding scratches are starting to come through it on the block just slightly. So, you know, it's about the thickness of a layer of primer. You know, I'm going to be putting at least 3 coats of primer on this before I do the final blocking, after all of the body work's done, including everything else. But yeah, this is my nemesis right here. This will probably take an hour or so with a hammer and a dolly, and to get it where I want it. And then there's definitely going to be mud in here. Not much, it'll be thin, but there'll definitely be a little mud in there, a little filler. But yeah, someone had this whole thing coated in filler. It was ridiculous. I'll get a lot closer than that. And then this was the other side, and you can kind of see I've worked on this a little bit, but not a lot yet. I'm actually going to do a combination of things on this. I'm going to do some heat shrinking and some hammer and dolling on it to bring it up, you know, again, I'm still probably going to go ahead and coat the whole thing with filler and then work it back down, block it all out. A lot of these older panels, I mean, I've actually heard of guys on those high-end show cars covering the whole thing in filler and blocking the whole thing down. I'm not going to go to that level. Now this corner is one that goes bye-bye. It is solid, but it's not. No amount of rust mort, in my opinion, will solve that. Actually, this particular one has even holes in it, even though it feels solid. The other side doesn't have these holes in it at all. It just has more of this action. And once you see pitting, you know, that's not good. That's welding it. That's cutting it out and welding it. You know, it's the hazy spots. This fender doesn't seem to have any where I would need to be rust morting, so I probably won't bother with it anywhere on the outside. At least I am going to rust mort weird things like that. You know, I'm obviously going to sand this all down and clean it all up, but I'll still probably put rust mort on it before I spray it and, you know, cover it in epoxy primer, because I'll be, you know, primering the inside. But yeah, this is really clean. You know, a lot of these cars are known to have major problems in these corners, and this is minor. You know, I'll probably take out, you know, I'll probably replace that whole chunk down in through here, and then I'll TIG a new panel in and then grind it smooth, and it'll still need a little mud, but it'll be 10 times better. So that was a little hammer and dolly action. I'm gonna stop the video here. I'll do a separate video next on heat shrinking, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the panel prep video. This is the fender now. It's done. I've obviously spent the last week finalizing the first fender with all the body work and the primer, and it's pretty much final. I haven't blocked this out yet. There will be some touch-up blocking that'll happen, but for now it's ready to bolt onto the car, because I won't do any of my final blocking till after it's assembled on the car. I'll block it out, make sure all the body lines line up. But I got a pretty crisp edge on that thing, at least for me for now. There's 3 solid coats of primer, so I want to work on those body lines a little bit more. They're looking way better, way crisper, way straighter. Everything on this fender is really turning out. The dent that was in the top that I dollied out is gone. Obviously, there was actually a couple other dents in there as well that are gone. So I am going to finish. I primered the inside as well and cleaned it all up. I haven't cleaned up this area yet and primed it. Obviously, we'll be doing that before it goes back on the car for its final block. And I'm actually toying with the idea of spraying the jam area and actually finishing that and painting it before then, because that won't really be affected. But I'm going to do a few different videos, I think, after kind of reviewing this last one I did on panel prep. I'm going to do this in a couple different portions over the next few weeks on what I did to turn a fender that used to look most like this one and turn it into more like that. So I have probably 8 to 10 hours worth of body work on that, and that's for me, who's a slacker, who's not a guy who does this professionally every day, just tinkering around in my shop, doing it little by little. So I'm going to go through the next few weeks and try and get some videos and kind of show how I did that. You know, we kind of started with the panel prep now. Next video I'll post here in a couple weeks after this one goes up. I'm going to go ahead and show a video doing a patch panel. This one is going to be a butt weld, or excuse me, yeah, a butt weld patch panel rather than a flange weld or a lap weld. You just can't get in here, so I'll do that. I'll do a different one on heat shrinking when I go to do the hood. There'll be a little bit of heat shrinking on that I'll be doing, and you know, I probably won't show a whole lot on the doors, maybe some different mud videos. So I'll try and get these in an order that works, that kind of shows a process for each one. There's going to be hundreds of hours for me in body work here before it's ready for paint, and you know, it's fun just taking my time and enjoying it. I'm learning, I'm getting better at it as I go. I'm sure with anything there's a lot to learn, and at some point, once you've got all the information, it just takes practice and experience. You know, these guys that do these for a living can bust this sort of stuff out quicker. You know, a lot of the body lines on these fenders, you'll see, you know, they talk about the car being straight. It's not just the panel being flat and straight. It's also where the body lines meet the car. You know, a lot of, it's going to be hard to see here, but if you can see it, this rounds off slightly. You know, when you're looking at a show car and you see these, you got to say, well, it's straight or not. Well, a lot of guys don't crisp these edges up very well. You know, you actually run mud down the whole side, light layer of mud. I call it mud. It's filler. And, you know, you square these off a little bit. You get these a little bit crisper. All the body lines are crisp and sharp. You know, you can kind of see this one now. A lot of that, it doesn't dive down. It's a lot crisper on the edge. And like I said, this one needs a little more blocking, but it'll get there. It's way better than it was. And you know, I used a 2K primer when I built this up. It's fine for now. I can leave it in this condition. It's not in bare metal. You know, I want to get these panels out of bare metal. My shop is clean and dry and fairly warm, but still, bare metal, being in anything exposed to moisture, can create rust over time. So yeah, we'll end this video. Hey, hit like and go ahead and subscribe if you think this is all worthwhile watching, and we'll go on to the next one. Thanks again.